Imagine the Pope declares a holy war, and within months, thousands of peasants, armed with little more than pitchforks and divine ambition, march into foreign lands, loot their Christian allies, massacre Jewish communities, and perish long before reaching their destination. Isn't this more like a fusion of religious jihad, social rebellion, and Game of Thrones politics than a pilgrimage? The First Crusade wasn't just a military expedition. It was a saga where faith became a weapon. Saving your soul meant pillaging someone else's, and every hero turned traitor before the final chapter. Victory came soaked in blood, and no god, it seemed, showed up on time. Subscribe to our channel if you love deep, slow-burn historical stories, unfiltered, but rich with irony and insight. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? We're always curious to see which corners of the world join us. Imagine Europe at the end of the 11th century, not the Europe of espresso and democracy, but one that reeks of sweat, stale bread, holy water, and fire. A continent where kings are barely distinguishable from bandits, feudal lords kill each other over the right to bear a frog on their coat of arms, and the church is not just a spiritual refuge, but the most powerful player on the political chessboard. It is here, in the heart of chaos, that an idea is born, one that will change the world: the Crusade. Feudal Europe of the 11th century wasn't just a patchwork of petty states. It was a tangled knot of private armies, ambitions, and grudges. Younger sons of noble families, destined to inherit nothing, were hungry for glory and land. Europe was too crowded. Every valley already belonged to someone. But what if we sailed across the sea, killed a few infidels, took their land, and, bonus, had our sins forgiven? Not a bad deal. More than that, a spiritual investment package. Pope Urban II was a complicated man. Textbooks paint him in soft tones, a pious old man calling for good. But in reality, Urban was a disciple of Cluniac reform, an ideologue of papal supremacy, and an experienced political operator. He knew perfectly well, the crusade wasn't just about saving Jerusalem. It was a golden opportunity to boost papal authority above kings and emperors. In November 1095 at Clermont, Urban spoke to a large assembly of bishops and laymen. He spoke of the Holy Land suffering under Muslim boots. But truly, he was talking about Europe, about cleansing it of its sins, its violence, and perhaps of itself. It's worth remembering that the invitation to launch the crusade came from Byzantine Emperor Alexios III Komnenos. Byzantium, refined, ironic, exhausted, asked the West for help. And help came, bearing crosses and appetites. Alexios expected a small elite mercenary force. Instead, he got tens of thousands of armed zealots who saw him as a semi-heretic and secretly dreamt of Antioch. This alliance was like remarrying your ex, formal on the surface, a disaster beneath. Deus vult, the slogan of an era. Urban II didn't just call for a crusade, he launched one of the most successful PR campaigns in history. His words, Deus vult, God wills it, became the viral meme of the 11th century. People shouted it, stitched it onto clothing, and painted it on banners. It justified everything: murder, plunder, conquest. Urban's listeners were so moved that many took the cross on the spot, literally sewing cloth crosses onto their tunics. Some did it from religious ecstasy, others from calculation. For many, it was a ticket from a boring village to eternal legend. The crusade became a kind of business plan for thousands of young nobles. They carried not only faith, but sharp economic motives. The East seemed richer, the land more fertile, the cities wealthier, and the enemy, conveniently, other. Thus, an army was born. Not regular, not disciplined, but wildly motivated. It included counts and beggars, knights and peasants, fanatics, adventurers, and power players. Europe was preparing for war, though it wasn't entirely clear with whom or for what. While Urban kept sending out papal letters, Europe was already boiling. Villages collected donations. Blacksmiths forged weapons. Monks predicted the end times. The continent was waking up, not with faith, but with passion. And that passion would soon become blood. History loves symbols. Officially, the First Crusade began with Pope Urban II's sermon at Clermont. But in truth, it started earlier and with far less noble characters. Not the Pope, not knights, not dukes, but hungry peasants, charismatic fanatics, and social outcasts with rusty blades. Because when Urban II called for the crusade, Europe heard something very different from what he intended. He spoke of Christian solidarity, strategy, and diplomacy. But people heard, "Pack your bags. God awaits you in Jerusalem. And your sins? Forgiven." Peter the Hermit is often described as strange, unkempt, and a bit mad with divine fervor. But the truth is, Peter was the most successful religious influencer of the 11th century. He traveled across Europe, preaching in towns and villages, weeping, shouting, beating his chest, and it worked. Peasants, widows, the poor, artisans, those who never had a voice in politics or religion, suddenly felt like part of a grand divine plan, and thousands began to march, with no organization, no supplies, no leadership. In 1096, the first unofficial crusade began, the one historians awkwardly call the People's Crusade. It was a procession of faith, hunger, illusions, and very bad logistics. Columns from France, Germany, Italy, including women, children, the elderly, and young, set off eastward. Along the way, they looted Jewish communities in Mainz, Worms, and Speyer. Brutal pogroms the church nominally condemned, but did little to stop. Clashed with local feudal lords. Carried anti-Semitic fury fueled less by theology and more by social resentment. The People's Crusade was the first warning sign. Without leadership or planning, a holy war becomes pure anarchy. Hungarian lands posed an early challenge. Local rulers initially let the Crusaders pass. But when looting and violence erupted, they struck back, hard. Tens of thousands of pilgrims were wiped out before even reaching the Balkans. When Emperor Alexios the Komnenos of Byzantium heard of this pitchfork horde, he was stunned. He'd asked for elite troops. Instead, he got a peasant apocalypse. When Peter the Hermit finally reached Constantinople with his ragged band, the city fell silent. On the streets, nervous stares. Outside the walls, tens of thousands of unorganized people demanding ships, food, and Jerusalem. Alexios, the same emperor who had asked for help, acted fast. Get them across the Bosporus and far, far away from the capital and from trouble. Once across, the mob found itself in Anatolia. With no strategy, no intelligence, and no idea who they were fighting, they ran straight into Seljuk Turks. The Turks didn't hesitate. In August 1096 near Nicaea, nearly the entire People's Crusade was annihilated. Peter survived. He'd conveniently returned to Constantinople days earlier, on business. His followers died. Thousands were burned, slaughtered, or scattered. The People's Crusade was not a story of heroism. It was a disaster. But in Europe, it became myth. Preachers spoke of martyrs, a pure faith lost for Jerusalem, but emperors and generals drew another conclusion. Faith without discipline is a recipe for tragedy. Urban II no longer called just anyone to arms. From now on, the real crusade would be a mission for princes, knights, and professionals. And soon they would begin their march eastward. After the bloody chaos of the People's Crusade, disastrous but instructive, the real players entered the stage. Aristocrats, princes, veterans, men who understood sieges, discipline, and political maneuvering, but also men with ambitions, egos, and personal plans for the Holy Land. The First Crusade was finally taking shape, along with its complications. Some of the most powerful nobles of Europe took the cross. Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine, stern and devout. Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman adventurer seasoned in the wars of southern Italy. Raymond of Toulouse, a pious and politically shrewd count. Robert of Normandy, son of William the Conqueror, and Tancred, Bohemond's fiery and ambitious nephew. All were Christians, all were knights, but they were also rivals. This wasn't just about saving souls. It was about land, glory, and titles, things that tend to fracture even the faithful. Before advancing to the Holy Land, all forces had to pass through Constantinople. And this is where one of the era's most fascinating diplomatic games unfolded. Emperor Alexios Vers Komnenos, who had initially called on the West for help, now saw tens of thousands of well-armed, very hungry foreigners at its gates. He had to improvise quickly. Alexios demanded an oath of vassalage from each crusader leader. Whatever lands they captured would be returned to Byzantium. No oath, no ships, no support. The crusaders nodded politely. Some, like Raymond, swore reluctantly. Others, like Bohemond, saw the oath as a tactical excuse for future conquest. Many simply lied. The first major test came at Nicaea, a Turkish stronghold of strategic importance. The Crusaders laid siege with rams, catapults, scouts, and provisions. But just as they prepared for a final assault, the city suddenly surrendered. Not to them, but to the Byzantines. Emperor Alexios had secretly negotiated with the defenders, surrender to him and keep your lives. Bohemond and Raymond were furious. They'd been denied glory, loot, and political leverage. The Crusaders realized Byzantium wasn't an ally. It was a rival. This moment planted a poisonous seed in East-West relations for generations. The crusade began to splinter. Bohemond and Tancred eyed Antioch. Raymond focused on Jerusalem. Godfrey aimed for moral leadership. Each had his own army, chaplains, and ambitions, and each kept a written chronicle, portraying himself as the hero and the others as schemers. These texts, which survive to this day, are less historical records than 11th century PR campaigns. After Nicaea, the Crusaders marched into Anatolia, hot, hostile, and unfamiliar terrain. The Turks avoided open battle, favoring ambushes, supply raids, and guerrilla tactics. The first real losses began. The sun scorched, the marches stretched on, and internal tensions simmered. But the army held together, for now. They were heading toward Antioch, a city that would become their first real hell. If the march to Nicaea was a prelude, then Antioch was the main act, raw, desperate, and brutal. Here the crusade ceased to be romantic and became a dirty, protracted siege. It was a test, not only of military skill, but of endurance, loyalty, and, above all, morality. After Nicaea, the Crusaders pushed deeper into Anatolia. The Turks used scorched earth tactics, destroying anything that could offer food, water, or shelter. A crisis emerged. The army began to starve. Noble knights and peasants died side by side, and this was all before Antioch. The city, seen as the gateway to Syria and Palestine, stood firm. Massive walls, strong towers, and a Turkish garrison. But the worst part, the siege dragged on. For months, the Crusaders lived outside the walls, cold, hungry, under constant threat. Diseases broke out. Betrayals began. Several contingents deserted. Some leaders, like Tancred and Raymond, played their own games, each trying to be the first to take the city. And then came Bohemond of Taranto, the perfect hero or schemer, depending on who you ask. Bohemond struck a secret deal with an Armenian guard inside the city. On the night of June 2nd, 1098, a small band of crusaders scaled the walls, opened the gates, and the city fell. By morning, nearly everyone inside was either dead or enslaved. Muslims, Orthodox Christians, even fellow Christians, no mercy was shown. A holy city became a sea of blood. But this was only half the disaster. Days later, a large Turkish relief army under Kerboga arrived outside Antioch. The Crusaders, now inside the city, found themselves besieged. Those who had been attackers were now trapped. Panic, starvation, desertions, cannibalism. Yes, according to several chronicles, some crusaders resorted to eating the dead, not out of cruelty, but desperation. Then came a miracle, or a fraud. A monk named Peter Bartholomew claimed he had a vision from St. Andrew, revealing the location of the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. They dug where he directed and found it. Spirit sword. This relic became a rallying symbol. In June 1098, the Crusaders launched a final assault and defeated Kerboga. It should have been impossible, but it happened. The Holy Lance became a symbol, a motivator, a PR tool, and perhaps a fabrication. Later, Raymond and others accused Peter of faking the discovery, of burying the relic himself. But did it really matter? The crusade had survived its first great crisis. Bohemond, now a hero, refused to hand Antioch over to Byzantium. "It is my prize," he declared. There were curses, arguments, political fallout, but nothing changed. The Crusaders left a garrison in Antioch and continued their march. Jerusalem lay ahead. But they now understood God didn't always provide bread. Sometimes he only gave faith, and perhaps a spear that could start a legend or a lie. After Antioch, the Crusaders marched not as an army, but as shadows of themselves, exhausted, burned, bloodied, but still alive. Ahead lay Jerusalem, a myth, a goal, a symbol, and it became clear that the path to the holy city would lead not only through sword and fire, but through betrayal, division, and moral collapse. They passed through Syria and Palestine, deserts, strange lands, deceptive promises from local rulers. Raymond of Toulouse, still hoping to lead the crusade, became increasingly independent. Other leaders, Bohemond, who remained at Antioch and Tancred, followed their own ambitions. The march to Jerusalem fragmented by routes, by egos, by survival strategies. But they reached it. In June 1099, the Crusaders stood before the city and saw its walls, tall, fortified, held by the Fatimid Caliphate, and not a drop of water nearby. Scorching heat, no supplies, and a gnawing sense that God was silent. Morale was disastrous. Many doubted whether to continue. Some proposed retreat. But once again, religion intervened. As in Antioch, signs and visions appeared. Some saw angels, Others heard voices. Many simply refused to die for nothing. The siege began in July. The final assault came on July 13th. They built wooden towers, battering rams, anything they could. And on July 15th, 1099, after fierce fighting, the Crusaders broke into the city. And then came the massacre, one of the most horrific in medieval history. Chroniclers describe a scene of unrestrained slaughter, swords cutting down Muslims, Jews, even some Eastern Christians. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, so much blood was spilled that, according to Raymond of Aguilar's, it reached the bridles of horses. Exaggeration? Yes. But it tells more about the spirit of the time than raw numbers. The city was on fire, drowning in blood and screams. And at the same time, prayers. Crusaders killed and prayed, slashed and crossed themselves. The holy mission ended in blasphemous ecstasy. But they did it. Jerusalem, the city of three faiths, was now in Christian hands. And then came the question, who rules now? Bohemond had stayed in Antioch. Raymond declined the throne, or pretended to, and so Godfrey of Bouillon, quiet and practical, said, I will not wear a crown of gold where Christ wore a crown of thorns, but I shall be protector of the Holy Sepulchre. Thus, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was born, founded on blood, fanaticism, and, paradoxically, deep faith. It was the peak of the crusade and its moral collapse. The First Crusade had achieved its goal, but did it save any souls? Was this victory, or a new kind of colonial conquest under the sign of the cross? The crusade was over. Jerusalem was in Christian hands. The army had dispersed. Some returned home, others stayed behind to build a new kingdom. It looked like victory. But when the smoke cleared, only questions remained, and silence. What did the crusade actually achieve? Militarily, success. Tactically, a miracle. A ragtag, uncoordinated army managed to cross thousands of miles, win key battles, and take seemingly impregnable cities. But at what cost? Morally, it was a disaster. A campaign preached as a path of faith became a flood of brutality. Hundreds of thousands dead, cities looted, communities wiped out, a deepening divide between Eastern and Western Christians, and an outbreak of anti-Semitism that would never truly vanish from Europe. For Byzantium, it was betrayal. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos realized that those he had invited as allies had become a threat. Never again would Byzantium trust the Latin West. And the West, in turn, now saw the empire as weak, deceitful, and half-Christian. Seeds of the Great Schism were planted, seeds that would bear fruit for centuries. For the Muslim world, it was a shock. The First Crusade struck at a moment of disunity, but the response would come. The name of Saladin was already stirring on the horizon. One day, he would answer, fire for fire. And Jerusalem itself, it became the capital of a new kingdom. Latin nobility arrived. Castles rose. Feudal law was established. But the city never became a holy utopia. It became a borderland between faiths, cultures, illusions, and harsh realities. For many crusaders, the campaign ended in death. For others, in exile. Those who returned home were not heroes, but men haunted by what they had seen and done. Europe didn't welcome them with cheers, but with suspicion. What had you seen? What had you done? Was it worth it? Yet one thing remained. The idea. The idea that violence could be holy if done for the glory of God. That war could be forgiveness. That killing could be mission. That idea didn't die in Jerusalem. It only woke up. Together, we have marched through hunger and sieges, fanaticism and betrayal, miracles and blood. The First Crusade isn't just a story of war, it's a story of human nature, our thirst for faith, power, justification, and legend. If you've made it this far, you are a true pilgrim of history. Thank you for your attention, your time, and your curiosity. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next episode. And share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. We read them all. What comes next is darker, more tangled, and even more revealing. See you in the story of the Second Crusade.